All right. So welcome everybody to another Hallway Hangout. My name is Nick Diego, and joining me is Ryan Welcher. We are both developer relations advocates at Automatic, but working full-time on WordPress. And so one of the things that we do for those that are new to Hallway Hangouts is run these events, usually about once a month, around some topic related to WordPress, hopefully. And it's a pretty casual conversation. The topic today is block variations. And we're going to start by kind of going over what block variations are. And he's built a really cool plugin that kind of takes block variations to the next level. And he'll show us that. But it's an opportunity for you all to ask questions. If you've built any block variations or run into problems with block variations, this is also a great forum to share that. But yeah, anything else you want to add, Ryan?
No, that's it really. Yeah, we're hoping to see all the awesome things that you in the community have done, and just have a good chat about it.
Great. One of the other things before we begin, some of you who are longtime Hallway Hangout attendees and maybe who have attended past FSC full site editing calls for testing. So that was something that was run by Anne McCarthy. She's a prominent member of the community that would run a lot of these Hallway Hangouts. Because WordPress Phase 2 is kind of over now as we move into WordPress 6.4, which is going to be coming out at the beginning of November, our team, Ryan and our team, were kind of taking over some of this community outreach stuff, and we're focusing a bit more directly on developers. Developers, I know, can sound like a scary word, but basically extending WordPress, things like block variations, things like building block themes, basically focusing this content on people building for WordPress, a little bit less on the user-focused stuff and more on like those of us that are building with WordPress and need to kind of learn how to use some of this new stuff. So as we look ahead, a lot of these Hallway Hangouts are going to be a little bit more focused on builders as opposed to users. And we actually have one, I literally just put it in Meetup a few minutes ago. We are going to have a really fun Hallway Hangout at the beginning in October, on October 12th. It's going to be what's new for developers for WordPress 6.4. So just to look ahead, that should be a really fun one. We're going to try and do these release-specific Hallway Hangouts right before each major release moving forward. So this is going to be the first one for 6.4, kind of covering all kind of the major stuff, if you are a developer, that you might want to know ahead of the release, and as well as some additional resources to help you get up to speed. So just something to look out for, and kind of a look at how Ryan and I and our team with Justin Tadlock, one of our colleagues, is going to be kind of looking at these Hallway Hangouts moving forward. Great. So let's talk about block variations. So who here has built a block variation? You can just say yes or no in the chat. I'm very curious. Lisa, of course, Lisa has, yes. Okay, a lot of people have built block variations. Awesome. Okay, some people have said no. So what we wanted to kind of talk about today is the fundamentals of building a variation, maybe some things that you didn't know about variations, because it's one of these topics around block development that at least we feel isn't covered as much. There's a lot of content around how to build a block, and it can be kind of challenging to build a block, and yada yada yada. Block variations are actually really easy to build, relatively easy to build, and they can provide you a lot of functionality that you might think that you need a block for, but you can actually use a variation instead. Okay, so Lisa's attended my previous variations webinars, so yes, I've talked about variations a lot in the past. It is something I'm passionate about. So what I wanted to do to begin with is we have an article on the WordPress developer blog that was recently posted about variations. So a lot of the kind of my intro to variations is going to come from that article. I like that personally because you can, if I gloss over something or it's hard to parse as we're presenting today, you can check out that article and have all the code examples and kind of be able to repeat on your own what we talk about today. Also, in part of creating that article, we did an update to the developer documentation for variations. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So this is the actual technical documentation for variations. And so the article is like examples and kind of a more fun overview. And then the second link is the technical documentation. So if you're interested in variations, haven't built one before, those two pieces of content should get you up to speed pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just the way I like to learn is just learn by example. And I'm going to go through some very basic examples of how to get set up with variations. We'll stop, ask questions. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and then we'll just have a casual conversation about it. And Lisa has started off us with a question here. Is there a big difference between making a pattern of one block versus setting up a block variation? We're not going to talk about making a pattern of one block. Okay, actually, that's a very good question, and we'll talk about it as we go through. Put a pin in that, Lisa. I'll address that once we start building. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And what am I sharing? I'm sharing screen one. Okay. So what I like to do when I present, I like to kind of go over what I'm using. I'm using WordPress 6.3.1. I have a theme called WordPress University. This is just basically a clone of 2023 with some style modifications. And for plugins, we have Gutenberg. Actually, we can deactivate this. We just have Gutenberg enabled just to kind of use all the latest stuff. For block variations, you don't need to use Gutenberg right now. But in this install, I have it. So let's come over here to pages, and I have just an empty page for block variations. So what we're going to do today is look at a block. Let's look at the media and text block. So we're going to add a media and text block. And let's go over to the sidebar here. And let's make the media and text block wide. And let's give it a background color of this light purple. When I go to the code view, you'll see that this block has a whole bunch of attributes. We have a line wide. Let me zoom in a little bit here. We have a line wide and we have background color. When we create a variation, what we're basically doing is we're creating let's assume that we're going to create a variation of the media and text block. We're going to create a version of the media and text block that has specific attributes or inner blocks, I'll talk about that in a second, that are already defined. So my goal here is that whenever I insert my block variation, instead of looking like the default media and text block that looks like this, I want it to look like this. I want it to be a line wide. I want to have it to have this background color. I want those attributes to be already assigned to my block. And I actually have that already built. So right now I have, if I type in media and text custom, I already have this block variation built, and I'll show you how that was done. But when I insert this now, I have a media and text block. This is a normal media and text block, but it has the background color and the alignment already set to wide. Now let's get to Lisa's question. Couldn't I have just created a pattern for this? Couldn't I have just created a block pattern that was the media and text block that had these attributes? And when I went to patterns, I would see it. Actually, we can do it right now. We can turn this into a pattern. So let's make this into a pattern. Wide media and text, create. I made it a synced pattern, but that's okay. But if I went to my patterns here, I could insert it, right? Why would I want to make it a block variation instead of a pattern? It really comes down to personal preference. When you create a block variation, you're basically, from a user perspective, you're creating a block, right? If I'm a user and you build for clients or whatever, they come in here to create a block, insert a block. These are blocks. Block variations show up as a block. A great example of this is the group block. So the group block in WordPress, group, stack, and row. The group, or a stack or a row, it's actually one block, the group block. But rows and stacks are a variation of the group block. So a user might think, oh, I'm adding the row block, I'm adding the stack block. But in reality, under the hood, they're using just a variation. So it's really about how you want to present content to users. Do you want it to be a pattern? Do you want it to make it feel like it's not just another block that's at their disposal? So let's look at the code and show you how this was done. And then we can take it to the next level by using some additional functionality called like is default. And I'll tell you what that means to really hammer home this point. So I'm going to hop over here. Oh, I have a lot going on. Oops. Hop over here. And this is my WordPress University theme folder. And I have under assets, JavaScript, I have a file called block variations. Let me hide this. In my block variations JavaScript file, I have this code that says WP blocks register block variation. Now, one of the things that you do when you build a block, again, we're not building blocks here, we're building block variations. When you build a block, generally you need a build process. Anybody who's familiar building blocks knows it can be kind of it's not challenging, but it's a more advanced setup to build a block. With block variations, you can use standard JavaScript. So we don't need any build processes. You can just take a theme like 2023, create a folder, create a JavaScript file, call it variations. And then in your functions.php file, you're just going to enqueue, where are we? Here we go. You're just going to enqueue that JavaScript file with enqueue block editor assets. Again, I'm not going to go too far into this. It's in the article. It explains all the setup process. But all we're doing is we have a single JavaScript file. We're enqueuing it like you do normal scripts and styles, but we're enqueuing it for the enqueue block editor assets. And that's pretty much it. We do need to pass through a couple dependencies, again, outlined in the article, but we're going to pass WP blocks, DOM ready, and edit post. WP blocks is important because that's what's allowing us to do this. WP blocks, and then to get our function for registering block variations. But outside, once you have the enqueue file set up, enqueue function set up, and you've created your file, this is all that you need to create that median text variation. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. When I come over here and I do media, and I see my median text custom, that's coming from median text custom right here. And that's how we're inserting our block variation. Now let's take it to the next level and talk about defaults. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this out. And we'll comment this one out. And this is where you start to see the difference between variations and patterns. Is default will replace the default block with your variation. So from a user perspective, let's save this now. Give this a refresh. When I type in median text, I only see one block. But when I insert it, I have the predefined median text using those attributes that I specified. So from a user perspective, they don't know any better. They're just using median text block. But you, maybe for your client or even for yourself, you've predefined it for a certain use case. Now, those who are familiar with locking blocks and locking things down, you can go even further with this so that this entire content area was locked down. So it's a great way to curate the editor experience, because this, instead of having to find again, you could use a pattern for this, of course. But the benefit here is that it's all in the block area. And again, it's really up to personal preference on how you want to present content to users, but this is another way, and I think it's fairly compelling. So let's see here. Let's see if we have any questions. Okay, so I have had a developer create a widget for Elementor for my plugin, but I'd also like to be available for block users. Is that generally easy to have them do? I think that they need to be familiar with building blocks in WordPress. There are some great tools to do that. And Ryan and I strive to educate folks on how to build blocks. So if they're not familiar with building blocks, I think it might be challenging, but it really depends on what you're trying to build. I don't know if you have any words of wisdom there, Ryan.
Yeah. Technically speaking, it's like building a block. There's plenty of tooling available. Like there's the create block package that, if your developer's has never built a plugin, or sorry, a block before, that will build out a plugin containing a very simple block that then they can build on top of. Probably the question mark of how difficult it's going to be is based on how tightly it's integrated with Elementor and Elementor's particular compatibility with blocks in that particular use case. I think it's fairly straightforward. But again, I don't know what that widget does. So I would say yes with a big asterisk.
Right. And I'm just going to drop this link here. Ryan's referring to the create block package, which I mean, we use all the time. Just scaffold blocks, which is really great. Let's see here. Can this be done in a separate theme or a separate plugin? Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the compelling ways of using variations. You could have, let's say you have a bunch of clients and you have all different sites. You could have a separate like must-use plugin, or a separate plugin that you use to have all your variations stored there. So you can use this anywhere. I'm just putting it in the theme here because that was the demonstration for demonstration purposes, but it can be anywhere.
And as just to reinforce that point, if your theme has custom colors and things like that, and you want to have a variation that uses those branding colors, it would almost have to be in the theme. It would be registered by a plugin, but it could potentially rely on the name of like the color variable that you've set and things like that. But just like blocks, you can register it in either a theme or a plugin.
Yeah, and speaking about the color, like, so if we look over here, it's listing the background color as tertiary. If I did like a custom color like this, all I would need to do is take a peek at the attribute, and you can see here now I'm using style, color, background. You do have to kind of get familiar with how the attributes are laid out for blocks. But if we come over here now and we change this out to, is that going to work? I think so. Like that. Now when we refresh here and we go to insert our media and text, yeah, you can see now it's blue. So it's really just about working with the variables. And I think a lot of times when you're building a block variation, at least for me, I built what I want in the editor and then get all the variables and pull it over into code to build my variables. Build my variations. Does this require block?
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that there's a question, but you were about to address it. So go ahead.
Yeah. So does this require a block-based theme? No, but it does require you to be using the block editor. Obviously, this is not going to work in classic editor or whatnot, but it does not require to be a block-based theme. Can I assign multiple classes that will be locked? Yeah, so okay, we can do that here. So if we, okay, they won't be locked, but if I did, for example, test class, like for additional classes, let's see how this, so yeah, there we go. So now we come over here.
Yeah, you can provide defaults, but they could be overridden potentially.
Exactly. Oh wait, this should be like this. I'm surprised that kind of still worked, but I guess, yeah, it's the same. So now when we refresh again, we'll see that it comes through with test class. Yep, and there's test class. So people could theoretically go in there and remove it, but it's there. So it's a great way of serving that as well. Okay, I want to make sure. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, could we turn off the supports for class name? The variation?
Yes, but I don't know if the supports.
Sorry, I've rabbit holed.
No, I think with client-side filters you can turn it off. So you could turn off the support for classes, and I think that they would still go through. You just wouldn't see the UI. So what we're talking about here is that there's a way to disable support for custom classes on blocks. And so what we're thinking about is if you disabled support, but then provided your classes through variations, then they'd be on the variations and they'd all work, but the user couldn't access them. Rabbit hole time, but like there are definitely ways that you can, more ways than just variations that you can use to curate the editor.
Yeah, you can use variations along with some other tools as well to do some really powerful things. Very possible. There's a couple more questions in the chat there. Block variations seem similar to block styles that can be chosen from the style pane. Are there benefits to variations over styles?
So block styles are a funny thing. Let's look at some block styles.
It's the best premise ever, or preface ever.
So block styles are here. So these are the ones that you can select, outline or whatever. I personally think that block variations are far more powerful than block styles. And while I use block styles sometimes, I generally use variations more. Block variations are great when you have really complicated CSS that you need to, that can't be supported in the editor. So for example, like this outline, the styling behind this is being powered by this isStyleOutline class. And then there's CSS somewhere that's styling the block. So when you need some like custom styles that can't be really powered very well by what's in the editor, block styles are great. Block variations are kind of using what's in. Let me back up. If you created a block style, you'll notice that none of these settings are modified. Now, this has changed slightly with some improvements in WordPress that I don't want to go too far down. But when I create this media and text block here, you'll notice that these are set. The background setting is set. The wide variable is set here. So this is really tying the block more into the editor interface, whereas block styles often are just styles listed in CSS somewhere. But where variations can be more powerful is we saw that we can pass classes to our media and text block here. So you could do the same thing with a variation. You're harnessing what's in the editor by using all the controls that are there in the block supports, pass it a custom class, and then serve custom CSS that you need, just like you would with a block style. Again, there's a lot of different ways to do things in the editor, and you really just kind of figure out which one works best for you. But nothing wrong with block styles. It's just that variations, you can't see block styles in the sidebar. Sorry, in the block inserter. They're specific to a block. So there's pluses and minuses in both places. If you switch to a different block theme, will these variations continue in the new theme or be lost? Unless the variation is in a plugin that isn't on, for both things, they will be lost. Because right now, these variations are part of the theme. Caveat, when I say lost, they won't be insertable like normal. But the key about variations is that it's just a media and text block with settings applied. So while you will no longer be able to insert like the custom with a blue background and wide, it will just go back to the default media and text block. The variation should remain be fine because you're just using normal block supports, that are in the editor. It's just a custom color, it's wide. So depends on how crazy you get it. Now, if you have a custom class that's providing custom CSS that you're serving, that won't come over. But it's actually it actually translates to different themes pretty well because it's just blocks and attributes and that sort of thing. Okay, let's move on a little bit because I want to save time for the rest of everything. Let's talk about unregistering real quick. So unregistering is really powerful, again, to curating that editor interface. The embed block is a classic one. If we go to the embed block, look at all the embeds that are on a normal WordPress install. You probably don't need all these. Your clients probably don't need all these. Maybe you only need like 3. Maybe it's like Twitter and, or X and YouTube or a few others. Every one of these is a variation, an embed block variation. So for in this example, what I'm doing is I'm unregistering the YouTube block. Now we need to use DOM ready here because if we don't, maybe you can explain this better, but Ryan, but basically you have to wait until all the variations in WordPress are registered before it can be unregistered. So by using WP DOM ready, we are waiting for Core to register all the variations, and then we're unregistering it. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, basically DOM ready runs about as late as it possibly can. It's waiting for the actual DOM of the page to be ready, and by that point, all the JavaScript that's going to run all the JavaScript that the block editor will need to like do its thing would have already run. So you're just sort of waiting for all that to happen. It's kind of like loading at the footer, or if you have the immediately evoked function expression from JavaScript days, the jQuery days, the iffy. I don't know if anyone remembers that stuff or not. Anyways, whatever. Yes, you got it right.
So we can see here that we have YouTube, and then when I refresh now, there's no more YouTube. So if we do embed, so it's pretty easy, and it's actually a really great way to just simplify things. So if you're building sites for clients, I would highly recommend using this at least to just clean up the things that they don't need. That's a great one. Let's get to something a little bit more complicated before we get into Ryan's much more complicated thing. And this one I've used a lot. This one's actually really handy. So we have the search block, the core search block. So the core search block, and let's just update this and this. So if we do, I don't know what I have on here. Okay, so this is going to return everything. This is going to be posts, and you can see it's returning pages that don't have featured images. So it's returning everything. It's just the normal WordPress search. But what we can do, though, is we can modify this. And WordPress does this. So like, for example, the WooCommerce, if you use WooCommerce, there's a search products block. That is just a variation of the search block. So there's a lot of blocks that are being used like in the WordPress ecosystem that are just using the same functionality. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a variation for the search block, giving it a name, giving it a placeholder, and then I'm using this query attribute to pass a post type. So in this case, I only want to search for posts. So we'll save that. And now when I refresh, I can do post, and now I have post search. So notice how the first search has optional placeholder, and this one says search posts already. And when I update this, and I go here, so we'll do the first one. We'll do university search, and we'll see that it brings in my pages, which I don't want. And now when I do university here, it's just bringing in my post. And at the top, you can see that it's searching by that parameter post type. So really simple little variation. So if you just want to have like on your blog page, just only want people want to search for posts, great way of doing that. Very simple to add. Where did you find the query attribute? So good question. And this is where getting comfortable and learning about the different parameters that are available to blocks is, I would argue, fairly, I don't know, tricky. Let's see here. I think that we can find this in. All right, let's see if we're right. So this is a great resource for core blocks. This is all like the reference for all core blocks. Let's go down to search. Okay. Right. So if you on this page, you can see all the different attributes that are supported by the block. So in this our case, search. And you can see here, if we zoom in really far, that search supports query. And then it does take a little bit of figuring to figure out like, how does that query work? and I'm sure we're going to get into more of this when we talk about Ryan's plugin. But this is a great resource. It's not the best resource. There's definitely ways that this page could be improved, but this is the core block reference that has all the attributes that are unique to those blocks.
And if you're comfortable in GitHub, you can also look in the, I just linked it in the, there's a block library package in the source directory. Each of the blocks in there have a block.json, and you can see what registered attributes there are. So it really just depends on what you're, oh, and there you go. If you click on it in there, you'll get right to it. That's even better.
I didn't even realize that was there. Yeah. So under search here, if you
That's
click
awesome.
on source,
Yeah.
this will take you to the where the search is. And then what Ryan was mentioning is this block.json file. This will list all the attributes that are unique to the search block.
Mm-hmm. Depending on the attribute and the block, you may need to do some further research, because if you see there online, I think it's 42, query is a type object, and it just, so but we don't know, it's not defining what the sort of the object properties are. Because it is kind of post search, you could probably make some connections to WP query and things like that. But yeah, so there might be some additional research in there to have to do, but for the most part, it's at least knowing that the name of the attribute is probably the hardest part to figure out.
Right. So what, like, post type is not listed on that page, but query is. So knowing that, like, the standard post query, like, more documentation could be there. And the question is I feel like I frequently need to do further research. I feel you, Lisa, and we're trying to improve that. But one important thing to note is that, and this is something that's been a problem or bone of contention for a lot of developers, this page that we see here, this core block reference, this is tied to Gutenberg. So whenever Gutenberg, I think it's tied to Gutenberg trunk, right, Ryan? I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So whenever there's a change in Gutenberg, it shows up on this page. So as a developer, you don't necessarily know, is it in 6.2? Is it in 6.3? Is it coming in 6.4? So we know that is an area of frustration ourselves as well. Mm-hmm. So some of this is a bit of trial and error to see what works. But once you have a couple things, like you figured out the post search, and you basically build blocks and tools of the different variations that work for you and you use. And I have like a little bundle of variations that I just automatically put on every site, and for my own, modifying the editor to suit my own needs. All right, I think we can probably, we could talk more about different examples that are in the article. I highly encourage you to take a look at them. But why don't we pass it over to Ryan and start talking about his plugin called the
Advanced Query Loop.
Advanced Query Loop.
That's okay. There is one more question. Larry Love Light asks, can you put variations in a child theme?
Yeah, absolutely.
We address that question before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, basically anywhere that you can register JavaScript, you can register a variation, pretty much. Like assuming that the block that you're trying to create a variant for is registered, you should be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. So I guess I'm gonna try to share my screen, and I will share my screen. I'm not gonna try. Okay, I'm gonna share my desktop here, and I'm gonna move all you nice folks out of the way, and move this floating bar that you can't see out of the way. Okay, so can everyone see my screen okay? Do I need to zoom in?
You're good, at least for me.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so shameless self promotion. This is the plugin here. So let's drop that in the chat maybe. That doesn't need to be over there. Sorry. So the reason I built this was because the query loop is fantastic. It does many things, but what it also doesn't do many things. So having the ability to make some more custom queries is something that a lot of people need, a lot of users need, a lot of developers need. So why I decided to go with a variation because the time it took me to build, well, maybe I'll just show this thing first, and then we can go from there, and I'll show you. So we have, So there's my advanced query loop. I'm just going to start with a simple title and an excerpt. If we open up the side here, you can see that there's a lot more tools available now to it. So what the thing that I started it for was the ability to do however many posts I want. I set a limit of 50 because if you're showing more than 50 posts on a page, you might want to rethink your layout. But so that sort of stuff. But it's sort of grown to have offset if we want to start at the second set
Brian,
of 10 or
do you
whatever.
mind zooming in a little bit? We have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Zoom in a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I have a crazy large monitor, so if this is too small, let me know. I might just can I nope, cancel. I don't know where the button is. There it is. Okay, found it. I don't know how WordPress works apparently. Yeah, so so it's offset. So I can do there's a whole bunch of ways to order the post. We can set it to ascending or descending. We can do post meta query. We can do a date query. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and all of this is built on variation. Yeah, so when I built my variation, this is a bit more complex. There's a bit more going on here, but basically the code is fundamentally the same. One thing I am introducing is a namespace. And now the namespace becomes important when I'm trying to identify, is this block active, basically. So this is active property, checks for this namespace, and if the namespace is in there, it will be active, right? And then so that's how it knows basically what to show over here.
Yeah, I actually didn't mention that, but yeah, I forgot to mention that is active property, but it's a really cool way of differentiating between things.
So that's that. So there's a couple of more advanced things here. One thing that I really like is you can define a scope and sort of basically where this variation kind of works. And so the default, I believe, is inserter, but you can also add transform. And what transform does is if I just get rid of this and I just put in a regular old query loop, and I just do this, and I decide, oh, I've just installed this amazing new plugin and I want to use it, I can actually come in and I can go into my list of transforms, and it will actually show up here, and it will transform the query loop into an advanced query loop. And so you get all of your settings that you've already saved, and now you get all the additional controls from the advanced query loop plugin. I feel like I'm pitching my product here, but that's not really my intent. So that's that. So I was talking earlier about or we were talking earlier about combining things to make your variation that much more powerful. And so what I've done is I've also that's not it. Where have I done this? I've done this in here. So I've also added a block filter. So what I'm doing is I'm running the editor.blockEdit block filter on this particular block, which is the query block, because I'm extending the query block, and then I'm basically modifying the edit of that particular block, the edit component, which sits basically is what the user experience is inside of the block editor. And there's some stuff going on here, but basically I'm checking to see, is this the advanced query loop? And if it is, I'm adding a whole bunch more controls. And if it's not, I'm adding a less amount of controls and just returning what's already there. So if you look at the layout here, the block edit ends about basically here. And then everything below this gets inserted programmatically with a system that's called the slot fill system. But so my stuff sits down below here because it's actually running after these two things are, because these two things are added by a core. But so that's a great way of like taking a block, making some subtle changes, but then also making like sweeping changes and adding way more stuff to it. And then each one of these controls gets all the regular props passed to it from the particular component. So if I want to do some set attributes, I won't get into all this because it's there's lots. I wrote this in over a number of months, and I don't really know how it all works anymore, I think. But the one thing that I really like about variations as opposed to creating a block, well, two things. The first thing is that I had my first control added in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It was ready to go. Because I didn't need to register, like I didn't need to create a block. I didn't need to figure out how to add a query. I didn't need to work with any of that stuff. I just did this. I added this one control and I set the attribute inside the query. I had to figure out the sort of like how to set the query for it properly, but it was already there for the most part. And I just added my bit and it just worked. The only other part I had to do was I had to get into the filtering of the query loop, which there's a specific article on the in the documentation about how you can modify this, but it was fairly straightforward. So for me to build this as a standalone block, it would have taken me a few hours anyways, probably most of a day to get it working properly. And I had my first iteration, like I said, in about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. The second part is really cool. Or the second reason is really, really cool. So because I'm extending a core block, or I'm making a variant of a core block, I also get all the functionality of that core block in like in perpetuity for for as long as it exists. And that's very, very cool because in Gutenberg 16.6, whatever's out right now, there is the query loop block has this experiment of doing pagination without a page refresh. It's very, very cool. And that just works automatically. I don't have to do anything. The only thing I have to do in this particular case is I have to activate Gutenberg because it's using the interactivity API. But when I do that, sorry, I'm just going to refresh. I have to pick my block. I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom, wherever that went. Sorry, a little bit down here. Thought I just enabled that plugin. Oops, Gutenberg. Yeah. Oh, I broke something. Oh, there should be oh, it's right here. I'm sorry. It's in the user experience. So this new piece got added because we're doing enhanced pagination. But if I view this post now, I should be able to go like this. Oh, that didn't work. Did it work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's working, and this is a pretty big deal. Like the ability to add multiple query loop blocks on a page and be able to paginate through them without refreshing the entire page is it's something that a lot of developers have been asking for a long time. And now my custom variation automatically inherits that, and I don't have to do any work, extra work to make that compatible, because at the end of the day, it's just a query loop block. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my end of my presentation. But if you have any questions or want me to show you any code parts of this, or Nick, I don't know if there's anything else.
I just wanted to reinforce the point. Like there are a lot of times when a core block maybe does too much, or when someone inserts it, it's not exactly the way you want it, or you want additional functionality to it, and there's a temptation to create a new block. And like this example that Ryan has is like such a great example of why you don't necessarily need to. The whole like interactivity API pagination thing, that would be a beast to build on your own. And to have it just already inherited into your plugin, so you're only adding the functionality you need, and you let core continue to improve. Again, this is kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, but over the last year and a half, WordPress has improved greatly in terms of block support. So like color and typography and so on and so forth. There are a lot of blocks out there in the world that just haven't kept up. Maybe they wanted to add like one thing to the core block, so they built their own custom block, but then they didn't keep up with the block supports and everything else. And then you have this block that doesn't have a lot of the functionality that you might want or expect. So using a block variation to add that functionality, you just automatically inherit all that good core stuff that's coming through. So the examples I showed were very simple, and probably could use this for a pattern. But Ryan's example is like the other end of the spectrum, where if you're really developing something for clients and something very sophisticated, it's a different approach to take than a block, and it might be exactly what you need. So,
From a strictly engineering point of view, I think it's less work. I mean, the block that I was just showing you, or the variation I was just showing you, has iterated and you know, lots of feature requests and stuff like that. But it, like I said, it took me 15 minutes to
yeah.
add such a powerful new feature to a thing just because it needed it. And it's not a lot of work, right? So if you're building for a client and you've got a budget, and you know, you could really look at a variation as a way of you know, really squeezing every development cycle out of that budget. Yeah. I don't think there's a question from Tina. Can any block be utilized for block variation, or are there limitations to which blocks we can create variations from? I don't believe there's any limitations that I'm aware of.
No, I have a bunch of custom blocks that you couldn't create a variation of a core block for. And yeah, I mean, people ask for functionality, like, how do I get it so when I insert the block, it does this? I'm like, just create a variation and just define the attributes and you're good to go. So yeah, any block that's using the normal block architecture, I mean, I don't know how you wouldn't use the normal block architecture, but yeah, you can create a variation for. To add DL DT.
I think Lisa's asking about modifying the markup that's returned from a block.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do that without in a variation. I think you could probably do it with a filter. I think there's a save. I can't remember the name of it. I'll look it up real quick. But I think there's a filter that might allow you to do that.
What was the render block filter, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends. If it's a static block, you'd have to do it in JavaScript, right?
Not on the front end. You can run everything through render block.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it's true.
Uh,
So maybe you wouldn't need to use the filter that I'm thinking of, but there's a filter in block hooks, and it's called something get save element.
Oh, I've used that
save
before.
content. Yeah, there's a couple of blocks of filters. So this is sort of out of the scope of what we're talking about today, but there's some block filters that might allow you to do that. Now, I preface this by saying, or I caveat this by saying that anytime you mess with a save function, you run into the possibility of block validation errors.
Yes.
So with great power comes great responsibility, and possible you might have to register some deprecations for the block. But again, this is kind of drifting out of the scope a little bit here, but just use it sparingly, use it wisely. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, in the render block, I mean, I have an entire plugin that if the render block didn't exist, the plugin wouldn't exist.
Right.
And so render block is good. You just have on the front end, you have all the everything, the markup, everything. So you can do things like what is the HTML? What's the tool where you can modify HTML? It's the
HTML the processor
tag
class?
processor, tag processor.
Yeah, tag processor. That's it.
So you can use like the tag processor to modify that and really do whatever you want. But again, it's you got to kind of mess with it to make it.
So Larry's asking, is this all the block level, or can you combine blocks into a variation? You could use inner blocks.
You can. I did not cover that, but I can. We have 9 minutes left, and I think I have an example for it. Let me just double check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You
if you got one, I'll shut up. Well,
I
was just going to talk through it as you were finding the example.
Yeah, go for
so like if you had like a group block, for example, you could take a group block and you could define its inner blocks, like what Nick's going to show, and that would be a way of doing that. You're also kind of like treading into the block pattern area a little bit. So, but I mean, all of these topics kind of, it's like a Venn diagram of where we sit inside of the 3 or 4 circles that are all touching here. So anyways, Nick, you go. You have a good example.
So for the media and text that we created, so the media and text block's a container, right? Let me get rid of this background. And you can put paragraph, you can put anything you want inside of it, any type of group in here. So the idea would be, when someone inserts a media and text block, can it already have some blocks already in there? Maybe like when you insert a media and text, and maybe this is like to curate the experience for a user. So like whenever they insert a media and text block, it's going to have a title and it's going to have a place for text, maybe a button. So what we have here in the very similar example is we define this inner blocks property. The notation here is a little bit annoying to write out. But for example, here in this inner block, we have a heading. And again, we're passing attributes to this block. So it's level 3, it's a placeholder as heading. And then we have a paragraph block that says enter content. So if let's turn this off, and we'll do media and text here. We save this now and we refresh. I break something, probably. Oh, well, let's turn all those off. This should work. And there's an example in the article of it working, so I promise it works. All right, so we got media and text, wide, inner blocks. Okay. There we go. Media, there was some other error. So now when we do the media and text inner, and we look at our list view, get rid of our searches here, we can see that that heading and paragraph have already been preset. And you could get really complicated with this. You could add as many attributes as you want, do the exact same things we talked about with attributes with the variation. Inner blocks is like a common thing. So like, there's different applications outside of variations where you would use inner blocks. So hope maybe some of you, this is not a foreign concept, but this is a way you would pass blocks that are inside of containers, groups, columns, cover block, text.
I was about to say that you should definitely so this will only work on blocks that support inner blocks. So like if you put this on a paragraph block, it won't know what to do with the inner blocks property. But I mean, that's anything that that you can put a block into, you can do that with.
Yeah. And so back to the original question that Lisa had of like the pattern variation, Venn diagram stuff. Maybe you have a pattern that has like really advanced media and text designs, but then maybe you just always want, when a user inserts that media and text block, instead of just like the very basic, just nothingness, blank canvases are sometimes hard, maybe you want to prompt them by giving them a heading, giving them some text, maybe even add a button, because in that site design, 9 times out of 10, it's going to look that way. They can always remove these, it's just a block. I can delete the paragraph if I want, but maybe that's just a way of, curating the editor for your users. So lots of options.
Lisa's asking if we can have too many variations. I think that's up to you, the developer, your client. I don't think so. I mean, maybe you don't need a variation for a button with every single color that your theme supports as a background. But maybe you have a client that doesn't ever want to use the sidebar. So I don't think so. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that? But I don't think there's too many.
Right. And this kind of comes down to how you want to present stuff. So like, for example, maybe, this is a great example. So we talked about disabling functionality, and this is outside the scope of this talk, but on the developer blog, there's some articles on how to use filters to filter functionality out of the editor. Imagine that you disabled color control for your users. They have 0 color control, but they use red and blue buttons. They need red and blue buttons. Well, you could register a variation for red and blue buttons. When they insert it, they don't have color control, so they just can only use the red or blue button. Now, if they do have color control, I think red and blue buttons just have a button, and then they can change the color red or blue. You could filter and restrict the color palette in that case. So it's kind of like you got to kind of pick and choose how you want to present functionality. And it's great to actually see that we are having a lot of ways to do this in the editor. In the beginning, in the past, there wasn't many ways to curate things. It was just the way it was. And now we're getting to a point where maybe there's so many ways of doing it that it's kind of hard to pick, which I think is better than the opposite. So, all right, we're almost out of time here. Does anybody else have any other questions that want to share any cool variations you've built or maybe problems that you've run into? I do want to point out, if you are getting into advanced variation construction, there are some issues that are being worked on, specifically around that default functionality where I said is default, and then like our variation replaced the median text block. If you try to set is default for another block that uses variations, for example, the group block has the row and stack, they're all variations. If you register your own group block with its, as the default, you might run into some conflict there. There is an issue working on that, but then there's also some guidance on how to approach that in the article and in the variation documentation. So there are some edge cases here and there, but in general, variations work very well. Great. Anything else you had, Ryan?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, Lisa, the hard part is deciding which way to go, which direction to take. And I know it's challenging. That's why I don't work with that's why I don't build things for clients anymore. But as we head out the door, I want to remind everybody that we have beta 1 for WordPress 6.4 coming up pretty soon. I believe is that I can find out right quickly. I believe it is the 26th. Yes, the 26th of the month. So we're about a little less than 2 weeks away. And 6.4 will come out on November 7th, I believe. And a lot of cool stuff. It is a shorter release window than 6.3, so it's going to have less stuff in it than 6.3 did, but a lot of great improvements as we move towards phase 3. Couple cool things. There's the font library, so you can change fonts and add fonts right within the site editor. There's a cool thing called block hooks that we'll probably be covering more in the future. So a lot of cool stuff coming up in 6.4, especially from a developer perspective. So we hope to see you again in the next Hallway Hangout. We also run another live type event called Developer Hours, where we kind of dig deeper into submit more heavy developer topics. We usually run one Hallway Hangout and one Developer Hours every month. So keep an eye out for those on Meetup, and we hope to see you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.